Picture this. An Emmy Award-winning broadcast journalist quits his job and decides to co-host a true crime podcast with his mother, an 80-something therapist who also happens to be a Holocaust survivor. And that book is Surviving the Survivor by Joel Waldman. Welcome to Between the Covers. I'm Ann Bocock, and joining me are Joel Waldman and Carmela Waldman. Joel's book is Surviving the Survivor, a brutally honest conversation about life and death with my mom, a Holocaust survivor, therapist, and my podcast co-host. Welcome to you both.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I've got to put a disclaimer or an apology out there. This one can get a little wild, so we apologize in advance for any shenanigans.
No, I will behave.
Before the book, Joel, you left a great career, a demanding career as a correspondent, and you started a podcast with your mother because, face it, who doesn't do that?
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of serendipitous. I tell everybody that everything I've done in life has been totally by accident. I started off as one of the first producer hires at MSNBC and wound up a national correspondent for Fox News Channel. And, I ended up having children late in life, which is very, very demanding because I was on the road probably 3 weeks out of every month and just thought it was time to move on. And then the pandemic hit and I was like, what am I going to do? So I didn't hit up any of my media buddies. I hit up this one to do a podcast.
I was very happy about it.
You were happy about it. Carmela, did you have to twist your arm? I mean, look, there's 1 million views a month.
Yeah.
Yes.
What did he say for you to go, let's do this?
He said, do you want to do a podcast with me? And he hardly finished the sentence. I said, yes.
It's a true crime podcast. You talk about the top cases, current cases, past cold cases. You have the best guests. You have attorneys and detectives. Where did the interest in true crime come from?
Great question. So I've always been a news junkie. This one is a licensed therapist. My father, may he rest in peace, was a psychiatrist. So I grew up very curious, which is why I think I became a journalist. And everything that I reported on throughout my career, it was kind of forced on me. So I worked at the New York Stock Exchange. I was covering U.S. equities. I knew nothing about it. Later in my career, I get thrown down to D.C. to cover politics. I didn't really know anything about that. I'd always been really attracted to true crime, just the psychology. Why do people do these crazy things in these moments of passion, or why are things premeditated? And when we started the podcast, it was just us talking. I thought she had more star power than Joe Rogan. I still think she does, but it just didn't take off. You've got.
He has illusions.
So you've got to have a niche, and we fell into it totally through happenstance.
Carmela, did you know anything about true crime before this?
I picked up the first 80 years off and on here and there, but I wasn't as into it as he was. And full disclosure, when we started, when we talked about doing this and going to the recording studio, we did not start immediately with true crime. We started with human interest stories, and we are both kind of very into everything that's happening all the time. And we interviewed very, very, very interesting people, which I'm very happy about. And it was very much in contrast with what was happening in the world, where there was epidemic going and everybody was locked down. And we were interviewing the people on Zoom so we could do it. But after a while, we realized, and we read some literature on podcasts, and they said, you have to find a niche. And through serendipity, we got into this niche, and he'll tell you how.
It's a perfect niche.
No, it's really, and it's a niche within a niche. So I joke with everyone. By the way, Carm, I call her Carm. She's my mom. I call her Mom, Carm. But she was a co-host. But now that she's 85, she has decided to slack in her older years. So
Semi-retired.
Semi-retired. So she's not on every night. But I kind of dubbed myself for a certain generation, which we're all a part of, the Larry King of true crime. So every night we do a live show on YouTube, panel-style show of the most topical true crime cases in America. We've got FBI profilers, we've got homicide detectives, we've got the kids of serial killers, you name it, we've got them on, but really big, high-profile names. Nancy Grace, Vinnie Politan of Court TV, they come on and we talk about these cases.
The podcast and the book all have the same artwork. It's the headshot of the two of you. But the podcast has this sticker over Carm's mouth with a warning.
So
the warning came true in the book because now they understand. On the podcast, I refuse to use four-letter words. I control myself. But when he provokes me in private, as we taped for the book, then I couldn't resist.
I think the quote was, you speak 6 languages and curses proficiently in all of them.
In all 6 of them,
Actually,
yeah.
I speak 5 languages.
Carm is she's a force of nature, a force of power, which is why I wrote the book, which is obviously what we're going to get into in a moment. But she claims it's me, only me, but I can elicit foul language from her. She likes to drop F-bombs.
He's a provocateur.
Yeah, and she speaks her mind. So if you ask my children, my 3 kids, they'll say that they learned all the curse words they learned from grandma.
Almost all.
Carmela, you are a Holocaust survivor. We learn in the book you were separated from your parents when you were 5 years old.
Yeah.
You were hidden in a boys' Catholic school.
Correct.
Now, the loss and the emotional trauma is more than many of us can even imagine. But how you handle it is a different dimension. And there's a backstory. Joel, you talk about Carmela and a friend who was also a survivor. And in this context, it's like, who had it worse? I mean, what's the lesson there?
The lesson is you are better off if there is no Holocaust. All kidding aside, the lesson is that you have to continue. And I think thanks to maybe my mother and my stepfather, my grandmother's love, and the community where I lived after the war, I and many people in this community who were not Jewish, suffered from the consequences of World War II. I had many friends who lost their father the way I lost my father, I mean a different way, but also lost their father. And we all just kind of went ahead and continued with our lives. But I think it leaves what happened to me at that age, I think it carries on to today. In other words, I think that there are certain traits of my personality that are as a consequence of that trauma.
The story that I was referencing, did you know about that before you interviewed your mother for this book?
Yeah, real quickly before I answer that, I just want to make it really clear. So this is a Holocaust story, but it's about 15 or 20% of the book, and the rest of the book is really just life advice from someone that's been through a lot, and it's not just the Holocaust. So, but I knew bits and pieces of the story. It was kind of like kaleidoscopic images, but my mother, and you'll find out through this interview and reading the book, no matter how bad things get, number one, she's always using humor, which is why I try to use a lot of humor myself and kind of half-jokingly joke that it's a laugh-out-loud Holocaust book. But I knew bits and pieces, and so when we wrote the book, and I say we because they're all recorded conversations, I really had to sit down as a journalist and ask questions, kind of from point A to point B, because there were so many missing gaps and holes in my head. But hearing it and recording it, really helped kind of make it a cohesive, cogent story, which I'm hopefully okay at telling in this book.
It is. It's everything. There are parts I laughed at and parts that were, kind of just gripped me. Your husband, Joel's father, died while this book was being written. You also lost a child. And yet, I read this book and all I see is strength and optimism. And this is your mother.
Yeah, this is why I wrote the book. So this book is really inspirational. It's not a book to get down and, 12th millionth Holocaust book about Auschwitz, people in Auschwitz camp, but more about resilience. And without a doubt, and my mom says this in the book, losing my father, her husband of 63 years, has been the hardest thing, and she's also lost a child. So it's really about overcoming that. And we kid with each other, it's my dad, well, it's my husband, who's it been harder on? Truth is, neither of us, I don't think, it's been almost 2 years. We haven't really properly mourned his death, but it's interesting to watch my mom in real time because she's in survival mode. She can turn things on and off, which most people can't do. I don't know how healthy that is necessarily, but she appears very healthy, and she's really a role model for the people around her.
She was a role model for me just reading this book. We talked a little bit about grief here. Everyone grieves differently, but Carmela, is there something generational? Have we enabled our children maybe to not be tough enough?
I enabled him 100%. I say it in the book, and I can say it without the book, that the biggest mistake I made in life is to spoil him. and his sister is not that spoiled because she was the first one.
So I come on TV, she puts me down. By the way,
I am not putting the book down. I'm putting you down.
It's not all my fault. We're leaving her condo today. I'm 55 years old. She's like, make sure you use the restroom. I said, okay. She goes, make sure you flush. She's yelling to me. I'm 55 years old, so part of the onus is on her. That's not a joke.
It's a joke. It's a joke. No, but I have a hard time allowing. I don't think I am, quote, healthy mentally. Everybody's kind of on the cusp of some craziness, but I think overall, helping other people in my profession. I have a master's in social work, and then I took additional courses, and I was doing therapy with people. Plus, my husband was a psychiatrist, and that certainly helped because he was a wonderful, supportive, caring, really a mythologically unbelievably
It's also,
nice.
by the way, it's interesting.
Right? That
yeah,
he's
I said you couldn't cut her off, but I could cut you off. So, like my father and her, the yin to the yang. So my father's very soft-spoken, very, very, smart and very assertive, but very quiet. She's screaming and cursing. So it was also an interesting compliment to one another. But I used to say to my dad, how do you take mom yelling at you? There's never a day that's gone by where and he goes in one ear, out the other. So now I use that in my own marriage.
In one ear, out the other.
Yes, it is working.
The book is incredibly honest. It is brutally honest in some places, and you can't help but, everyone cannot help but see this close relationship you have. What surprised you when you were writing this book?
Pretty much nothing, I would say, except for parts of the story that I just wasn't aware of. But look, some people read this and they said, it's funny shtick. This is not shtick. Our entire drive up here to the studio today, I was asking her, we're having a conversation about the importance of life. What is death? Like, we talk about things nonstop. I'm constantly worrying about certain things, and I tell her, well, what do I do? And she's like, talk to someone else. Don't talk to me. I'm too old now, whatever. But we're constantly going back and forth about what's important in life, what's not important in life, what should we value, what shouldn't we value. So these are conversations we are constantly having. And I just decided to record them. And like you said, some of them might be a little uncomfortable to listen to because it's literally like sitting in our living room while we're having a private conversation.
You're an Emmy Award-winning broadcast journalist. You have interviewed tons of people. Is it tricky interviewing your own mother?
Yes, because she's super smart, super shrewd. So it is, to get what I want to get out of her, I've got to come at it from a couple of different angles. But I tell everybody, I've been in broadcast news, or was in it 27 years. Now I have this podcast, but this is the most important story I've ever reported on, and it's just my dream that people will share this book and read this book, not because I wrote it and not because she signs every copy, having not written it, but because it is such an important story, I think, and it's far beyond the Holocaust. It's what is important in life.
It is definitely far beyond the Holocaust, but I have to go back to that for a moment because there is something referred to as second-generation survivors, where the children of Holocaust survivors feel sometimes guilt, sometimes pain. What about you?
That's what surprised me. So it's come full circle. That's a great question. So, my dad, who was a psychiatrist, as we mentioned, and she's a therapist, he hated labeling people. He was the least shrinky psychiatrist you could ever meet. My dad's favorite expression was just do it, or do it in spite of the fear. He was very logical. But one thing I definitely have is generational trauma. My mother is by nature paranoid. It's in her DNA. The Nazis were literally came and took her father, and there is no doubt. I mean, I have a much higher anxiety level than most people. I worry about things. I don't know why I worry about things, and I think these are all like defensive mechanisms that were literally given to me through osmosis. So, my dad would say, "Oh, it's mumbo jumbo. You make your own decisions. Life is all about choices." But there's no doubt that I learned that there is a certain impact that this has all had on me.
Definitely, you are the more sensitive. I kind of, one of the side effects of the Holocaust is that I learned when I was away from my parents at the age of a month before my 5th birthday. I went there and I was there for 6 months in that boys' school. I learned to almost like switch off pain, I numb myself, psychologically speaking. And I think I'm still using the same mechanism to a degree not to feel pain. And Joel is kind of open to pain, which is, to me, almost like a luxury to be open to pain. So Joel, and sometimes I'm like too hard and too tough and too cynical and too wise guy, and I know I am.
Carmela, you have this successful podcast, this book that is amazing. Was there anything off limits that you asked Joel not to include?
I don't think that there was anything off limit in our conversations. I don't believe in family secrets. I think we have to distinguish between family secrets, which poison families, and things that you don't dwell on or talk about or emphasize or bring up too much. I was raised by a mother who was a school teacher. My father was killed. I was raised by a mother who was a school teacher, and she was, in her youth, influenced by the Freudian theories, and she was very open with me. There was nothing we couldn't talk about. And I think I made the same mistake with my children when they were younger. And I remember we had a friend, Zvi, a psychiatrist, he says, Carmela, you don't have to talk about everything. I underestimated how much it would impact the children if I am really that open. So
I find this so refreshing. I think that children look at their parents, excuse me, as one-dimensional. And granted, most children do not write their parents' story. So having these conversations how did that work? Where there really was nothing off limits, where you learned of your mother, not as your mother, but as a whole human.
I mean, it's fascinating. The thing is, this is our lives all the time. It's not just in the writing of this book. I wish we recorded the conversation on the way up here, because I literally was asking my mom, what is the point of life? Like, we were just talking about, I was saying Elon Musk is worth $280 billion and doesn't even live in a home right now. You've got a social studies teacher in Iowa that has everything. So there's all these contradictions in life that I'm always thinking about, wondering about, and the person with all the answers always seems to be my mother. So
no,
I go to her. And
no, you ask the questions, and I don't know if you noticed in the last few years, I say I don't know the answer.
Yeah, sometimes she does say that.
I think it's a luxury to say I don't know
By the way, if
answer.
my mother is ever, if I call her for advice and there's silence, that's the only thing that triggers me in life, really triggers me.
You talked about not keeping family secrets. Recently, and this is personal, I had to go through my family's belongings. I found treasures, I found wartime notes from World War II that were things that were never discussed. I had grandparents that had to escape Europe. I never knew about an Auschwitz connection until I was old. I'm looking at you thinking, first of all, you should have been my therapist, and these secrets, having secrets is not healthy.
No. Not later than last night, I saw something on Netflix, and the whole story was related to family secrets, which of course never can stay there. Earlier or later, they explode and they come out. So, you sit on that secret and then you lose.
I think there's two dimensions, like there's the one side of the spectrum where people are just so closed off. Then I think we're slightly dysfunctional on the other end where we're talking about more than we probably should. But that's just the way I think we've always,
Well, I remember as a joke and not a joke, when Joel was a teenager, he would come and he would say, I feel. I said, Joel, try not to tell me so much anymore how you feel. I said, I don't care. And then people said to me, you're so lucky. My teenager never tells me how he feels. I remember
I still
people,
tell you how I feel.
Yeah.
And you still tell me not to tell you how I feel.
Yeah, I don't want to know how you have a wife that you love, share it with her.
Listen, I think life is absurd. I mean, and I just see all the absurdity in it. I think she does too, and that's why we complement each other. That this book is going to definitely change the way you see life. I can guarantee you that if it does nothing else.
But the main messages, I think, when you said the absurdities of, that in spite of the absurdities of life is beautiful, and especially now when I'm kind of feeling that one of these days, the hourglass the sand will disappear and I will die. I think now even more than ever, I realize how wonderful life is, with all its warts and all its aggravations and all its horrors.
That said, how do you look at all the things that are going on in the world today? Half full or half empty is that glass?
Well, right now, there is a little bit of a tension. I have a half-sister who lives in Europe, and seriously, without jokes, she's very concerned that there will be a world war. And there is this undercurrent of feeling in Europe. Luckily, we don't have it that much here as yet. So the world is pretty tense, and there are many conflicts that are very serious, and there are many political upheavals. But looking back on the last 85 years, I think there always has been a lot of conflicts. And there was a time when kids were trained in school to go under their desk in the case of a nuclear attack. So basically, I think it has been always, life has had challenges always.
Yeah, quick spoiler alert. So in the book, she's saved by not one, but two, what they call righteous Gentiles who are non-Jews. And I think that's a great lesson for today. There's so much divisiveness, hatred, and these are people who are not Jewish, who basically risked their lives to save my mother. And because of that, we have a photo of 4 generations. She's a great-grandmother twice.
Of all the stories you've ever told, how important was it to tell this one?
The most, by far. And I've interviewed presidents, I've interviewed vice presidents, I've interviewed politicians, I've interviewed tons of celebrities. I've had a very fortunate, interesting career. Nothing compares to this. And it's personal for sure, but I think the story will resonate with literally everyone, and it will change the way you perceive life, because everyone in life is going through loss and grief and hardships and hurdles. I feel like I'm going through it every single day, but my mother's just a real symbol of having those things in your life, but still moving forward, and moving forward at a very, very fast, effective clip and enjoying your life while doing it.
At the core of this book, it's a book about life, about death, and it's honest advice about living. So you know what I'm going to ask. What's the best advice your mother ever gave you?
It's great. You know, I don't listen to 99%.
That's exactly what what's
I'm
the
always-
difference what advice I give? He
Look,
doesn't listen to my advice.
My dad is a product of the Great Depression. He was born, my dad's born in Brooklyn, raised in the Bronx, but literally with, you know, apples on the corner for a penny that he was, you know, having to sell, that kind of thing. So I inherited that from him, which is like this anxiety. So I'm constantly moaning to her, am I going to be okay, financial, a million other things. And she's like, whatever you're worrying about is not the worry that's going to be the worry you need to be worrying about, if that makes any sense. And my dad, at the end of his life, and by the way, I'm working on Surviving the Psychiatrist, but you know, it was always, I'm worried about money, I'm worried about money, I'm worried about money. And at the end, last 10 years of his life, I'm just worried about time. I made a mistake. I should have always been worried about time.
There's a quote in the book from Carol Baskin, who people know from the Tiger King series.
Yeah, we interviewed
And she
her.
said that you were the endangered species. I wholeheartedly agree. Thank you, Joel Waldman, Carmela Waldman. I cannot thank you enough for sharing your time.
Thank you so much. By the way, she was calling it Lion King to her face the entire time. She was the only one in America that hadn't seen the show. But thank you so much.
Well,
and she,
thank you
of
so
all-
much for having
Of
us.
all weird people, she's one of the people that inspired me to write this book because of that quote.
The book is Surviving the Survivor. I'm Ann Bocock. Please join me on the next Between the Covers.